The distinct, horrifying crack sliced through the tranquil Saturday afternoon, a sound so viscerally alien to the meticulously manicured lawns and uniformly painted houses of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, that for a heart-stopping, dilated moment, Sarah Manning's mind simply refused to process it. Her senses registered it as a physical blow before comprehension dawned. Then came the scream, high-pitched, ragged a sound that tore through Sarah like shrapnel. Lily's scream. The world tilted colors bleeding at the edges, a kaleidoscope of sickening dread as Sarah scrambled up from the rose bushes. She'd been tending her thick gardening gloves, dropping unheeded to the freshly turned fragrant earth. Lily, her bright, precious 10-year-old daughter, was slumped unnaturally in her wheelchair, her usually vibrant face a mask of contorted shock and agonizing pain. Her small hand, already smudged with paint from an earlier craft session, clutched desperately at her left thigh. A dark, rapidly blossoming stain was spreading across the cheerful yellow fabric of her jeans, a grotesque parody of the sunflowers she adored. Standing a few feet away, a smoking pistol, still held loosely, almost uncertainly in her trembling hand, was Brenda Jenkins. Brenda, the newly self-appointed, fiercely zealous head of the HOA's Beautification and Compliance Committee. Her face a bizarre, unsettling tableau of incandescent fury, rapidly dissolving into a dawning, horrified realization. The petty, increasingly venomous argument over the small hand-painted "Be Kind" sign, nestled with innocent charm among Lily's prize-winning daisies, had somehow impossibly escalated to this. Unbelievable, impossible. Yet the acrid, metallic smell of gunpowder was undeniably real. Stinging Sarah's nostrils, a grotesque olfactory assault that brutally overpowered the sweet, cloying scent of the nearby jasmine bushes. Life in Harmony Creek had been until disturbingly recently precisely that harmonious, or at least a convincing simulacrum of it. Sarah had chosen this community with painstaking care after the catastrophic car accident 2 years prior, the one that had irrevocably altered their lives and confined Lily to a wheelchair. She'd been drawn by the prevalence of accessible ranch-style homes, the wide, quiet streets, perfect for Lily's adapted tricycle, and the glossy brochure's promise of a supportive, family-oriented community where everyone could thrive. For nearly 2 years, that promise had largely held. Lily, with her indomitable spirit and infectious bubbling giggle, had made friends with an ease that continually astounded Sarah. Sarah herself had found a manageable rhythm juggling her remote work as a freelance graphic designer with the constant, often demanding intricacies of Lily's care. Their small, lovingly tended garden had become their shared sanctuary, a vibrant splash of life and color. The "Be Kind" sign was Lily's own special project, painted in cheerful, slightly wobbly primary colors, a small, heartfelt beacon of her innate philosophy. It had sat undisturbed for months, a tiny, joyful assertion of individuality in a neighborhood that increasingly suffocatingly prized bland uniformity. The trouble, as it so often does, began insidiously a subtle shift in the neighborhood's undercurrent. Whispers at the community pool about stricter enforcement of long-dormant bylaws. A new, almost militant assertiveness emanating from the HOA board meetings which Sarah rarely attended, prioritizing Lily's evening routine. These changes culminated almost inevitably in the alarming rise of Brenda Jenkins. Brenda, a woman whose own lawn was a sterile, unnaturally emerald expanse of chemically treated turf and aggressively pruned, rigidly geometric shrubs, seemed to view any deviation from her narrowly defined aesthetic standards not just as a violation, but as a deeply personal affront. She'd started her reign with passive-aggressive anonymous notes left on windshields regarding slightly overgrown grass or children's toys left momentarily on driveways. Then she'd progressed to sternly worded condescending emails, CCing the entire board about non-regulation trash can placement and unapproved mailbox colors. Most residents busy with their own lives grumbled privately, but ultimately complied, unwilling to invite further more invasive scrutiny. Sarah, her world revolving around Lily's needs and her work deadlines, had largely remained oblivious to the low, anxious hum of burgeoning neighborhood discontent, dismissing it as typical HOA pettiness. She had her own battles to fight. The first direct, unavoidable confrontation shattered their carefully constructed peace on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was on the patio, patiently helping Lily navigate her online fourth-grade schoolwork, the warm sun dappling through the leaves of their oak tree. Brenda Jenkins marched up their walkway, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a medieval shield, her sensible shoes making determined rhythmic clicks on the flagstones. Mrs. Manning. Brenda began, her voice tight, devoid of any neighborly warmth, each word clipped and precise. Lily looked up from her tablet, her brow furrowed in innocent confusion. Sarah, forcing a polite, neutral smile, replied, "Good morning, Brenda. Is there something I can help you with?" "That," Brenda said, her lips thinning as she gestured disdainfully towards Lily's small, cherished sign, with a red pen she produced from behind her ear. "It is not compliant with Appendix C, subsection 4, paragraph B of the Harmony Creek Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. All yard decor, without exception, must be submitted with a formal application for approval to the Beautification and Compliance Committee. And frankly, that particular item is homemade. It significantly lowers the aesthetic tone of the immediate vicinity, and by extension, the entire community." Lily's lower lip began to tremble. "I made it," she whispered, her voice small and wounded, her eyes darting from Brenda's stern face to her mother's. Sarah instinctively put a protective arm around Lily's slim shoulders, feeling the tremor that ran through her daughter. "Brenda, it's a child's craft project. It's promoting a positive message. Surely in a community that values families, there's some room for reasonable interpretation, for a little kindness perhaps." "The rules are the rules, Mrs. Manning." Brenda snapped, her eyes cold and unwavering like chips of flint. "They exist for the good of the community, for maintaining our property values. That is paramount. You have 48 hours to remove the offending item, or a formal violation notice will be issued accompanied by an initial fine of $50. She turned on her heel with military precision and marched off, her back, ramrod straight, a picture of righteous conviction. "She's not very kind, Mommy," Lily said quietly, tears welling in her large expressive eyes and spilling onto her cheeks. "No, sweetie, she's really not." Sarah sighed, hugging her daughter tightly, feeling a surge of helpless anger. "But don't you worry about it for a second. I'll sort it out." Sarah tried. She composed a carefully worded, polite email to the full HOA board, explaining the situation, emphasizing Lily's disability and the sign's personal significance, appealing to their sense of decency, their humanity. The response, when it finally came a week later, was a curt formal letter, devoid of any personal touch, reiterating Brenda Jenkins's full authority in such matters and the non-negotiable sacrosanct nature of the covenants. She spoke to a few neighbors she'd previously considered friendly, hoping for a collective voice of support, perhaps a petition. She found mostly sympathetic but anxious shrugs and nervously averted gazes. It's best not to cross Brenda," one whispered, glancing furtively over her shoulder, as if Brenda might materialize from the azaleas. "She has old Henderson and the rest of the board completely wrapped around her little finger. Been that way since that audit scare last year. She somehow came out of it looking like a hero, and Henderson owes her." The comment about an audit scare was new to Sarah, a fleeting hint of something more complex beneath the surface of HOA politics, but her immediate concern was the sign. The fine arrived, as promised, then a second larger one, $100, when the sign remained defiantly in place among the daisies. Sarah paid them, seething inwardly, a bitter taste in her mouth. But she wouldn't take down Lily's sign. It felt like caving to a petty, cruel bully, like telling Lily her small, earnest effort to spread a little positivity in the world was worthless an offense. The tension simmered, a poisonous undercurrent in the otherwise placid neighborhood for weeks. Brenda Jenkins developed a new, unnerving habit of making a wide, slow detour on her daily power walks to pass directly in front of Sarah's house. Her gaze would linger with theatrical disapproval on the offending "Be Kind" sign. Sometimes she would mutter audibly under her breath words like disgraceful and non-compliance drifting on the breeze. Sarah would feel a prickle of anxiety, a familiar tightening in her chest, but she'd lift her chin, meet Brenda's hostile stare, and offer a deliberately pleasant, "Good morning, Brenda." A silent battle of wills fought across a few feet of meticulously edged green lawn. Lily, perceptive as ever, grew quieter, more subdued. The ever-present shadow of Brenda's disapproval seemed to dim her usual radiance, her easy laughter becoming rarer. Sarah saw the subtle, heartbreaking change in her daughter, and her resolve hardened into something fierce and unyielding, even as a persistent knot of dread tightened in her stomach. This wasn't just about a sign anymore. It was about standing up to petty tyranny, about protecting her child's vulnerable spirit from the casual cruelty of an adult who should know better. It was about the principle that kindness shouldn't be a violation. Then came that fateful Saturday afternoon. Lily had been particularly excited, her voice animated, as she'd wheeled herself over to the small sunflower patch they'd planted together right next to the Be Kind sign. She was thrilled to show Sarah the new fuzzy buds that promised future golden glory. They were laughing, Lily pointing, with pure, unadulterated delight, the sunlight catching the joyful sparkle in her eyes. Suddenly, Brenda Jenkins appeared, seemingly materializing out of nowhere, her face flushed, a dangerous mottled red, her eyes blazing with an almost manic, unnerving light. She must have been watching, waiting. "I have warned you, Mrs. Manning," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with strain, amplified in the quiet afternoon air. Repeatedly, this blatant insubordination, this flagrant disregard for communal harmony, will not stand. It ends now. "What?" "Brenda, please." Sarah began, her voice calm but firm instinctively, stepping protectively in front of Lily's wheelchair, shielding her daughter. "We're just enjoying our garden. It's a beautiful day. There's absolutely no need for this kind of aggression." "No need." Brenda's voice rose even higher, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "You openly defy the rules. You mock this community. You are actively teaching your child disrespect and defiance. This ends now." She fumbled erratically in her oversized beige handbag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, her knuckles white. Sarah's blood ran cold, a primal fear gripping her. "Brenda, what are you doing? Stop it!" Then the sickening glint of blued metal. The gun. Sarah didn't even have time to fully process to scream a warning before Brenda, her hand shaking violently, raised the pistol, not quite aiming, more like brandishing it wildly, and fired. The sound, the scream, Lily slumping a small broken doll. Time seemed to splinter into a million jagged shards. Neighbors, drawn by the gunshot and Lily's piercing scream, were emerging cautiously from their homes, their faces pale, mouths agape in disbelief. Someone, a distant voice, was shouting, "Call 911! Oh my God! Call 911!" Sarah was on her knees beside Lily, her hands instantly slick and warm, with her daughter's blood, desperately trying to staunch the terrifying flow, whispering frantic, desperate reassurances she didn't remotely feel. "It's okay, baby, mommy's here. You're going to be okay. Just hold on, sweetie, hold on." Brenda Jenkins stood frozen, a statue of dawning horror, the gun clattering from her suddenly nerveless, trembling fingers onto the pristine grass. The manic, righteous fury had vanished, utterly extinguished, replaced by a ghastly, vacant stare into some private, newly opened abyss. Henderson, the HOA president, a man usually full of pompous bluster and self-importance, rushed over from his adjacent yard, his face ashen, his jowls trembling. "Brenda, what have you done? What in God's name have you done?" "Woman," Ms. Albright, another prominent board member who lived across the street, arrived, wringing her hands, her face a mask of agitation. "She was provoked. You all saw it. Mrs. Manning has been consistently non-compliant. Brenda clearly felt threatened. It was self-defense." The words tumbled out, a desperate, pathetic, and utterly transparent attempt to spin the unimaginable horror unfolding before their eyes, to protect the HOA's image, even as a child lay bleeding. Sarah looked up, her eyes blazing with a mother's primal fury, locking onto Albright. "Threatened my daughter in her wheelchair, threatened her. She shot my child, my disabled child." Her voice was raw, ragged with anguish and disbelief. The wail of approaching sirens grew closer, a sound that for once felt like a promise of aid, rather than an unwelcome intrusion. The days that followed were a disorienting, agonizing blur of sterile hospital corridors, hushed, grave-faced doctors' voices delivering clipped prognoses, and the ever-present cloying scent of antiseptic. The bullet, a .22 caliber, had fractured Lily's femur. She would need surgery pins, a long and excruciatingly painful recovery, months of physical therapy. The physical trauma was immense, terrifying. But Sarah worried even more about the unseen wounds, the deep psychological scars, the stark terror etched in Lily's eyes whenever a door slammed too loudly or an unfamiliar voice startled her. The light in her daughter's eyes seemed to have dimmed, replaced by a haunted watchfulness. The Harmony Creek community was in a state of profound shock, bordering on collective trauma. Flowers, teddy bears, and awkwardly written cards began to appear on their doorstep, left by unseen hands. Some neighbors, their faces etched with shame and regret for their earlier inaction, their silence offered hesitant, mumbled apologies when Sarah briefly returned home for fresh clothes. The HOA board, however, predictably circled the wagons. Their official statement, drafted by a hastily hired, expensive-looking lawyer with slicked-back hair, spoke of an unfortunate, regrettable incident of Mrs. Jenkins's long-standing dedication to maintaining community standards and property values, and sickeningly implied that Sarah's persistent and provocative defiance of established community covenants had significantly contributed to a highly stressful, volatile situation. There was no direct apology, no explicit acknowledgement of the shooting of a disabled child by one of their committee heads. Instead, with breathtaking callousness, they arranged and paid Brenda Jenkins's bail. Sarah, suspended in a state of numb grief and incandescent rage, knew with a chilling certainty that she couldn't let this stand. This wasn't just about Brenda Jenkins anymore. It was about the entire rotten, enabling structure of the Harmony Creek HOA that had not only allowed but actively empowered and defended her escalating tyranny. She needed help, real legal help, not just the overwhelmed local PD. Her mind, exhausted but fiercely resolute, turned to the one person she knew deep in her bones she could always count on, the person she hadn't wanted to burden with her seemingly trivial neighborhood squabbles, but now desperately, unequivocally needed her father. Michael Thompson was a man of quiet, almost understated authority and unshakable, deeply ingrained integrity. He was also by profession a federal judge. Sarah had always been immensely proud of him, of his unwavering dedication to justice, his sharp intellect, his profound sense of fairness. But she'd rarely, if ever, called upon his professional capacity for personal matters, preferring to fight her own battles. This was different. This was Lily. This was an atrocity. She called him from the cramped, uncomfortable hospital waiting room, the cheap vinyl sticking to her skin, her voice thick with unshed tears and exhaustion, as she recounted the entire nightmarish saga, the escalating harassment, Brenda's increasingly unhinged behavior, the shooting, the HOA's utterly callous and self-serving response, the victim blaming. Michael listened in complete silence on the other end of the line, his breathing steady, a comforting, familiar sound. When she finally finished, her voice hoarse, there was a long, pregnant pause, so long that Sarah began to feel a fresh wave of anxiety. "Dad," Sarah whispered, a tremor of fear, that he too might somehow dismiss it, or worse, tell her she should have just taken the damn sign down and avoided all this. "Sarah." His voice, when it came, was low, meticulously controlled, but with a dangerous undercurrent she recognized instantly, a steely, glacial anger that rarely surfaced, but was formidable, almost terrifying when it did. "I need you to tell me everything again, very slowly, every single detail, every name, every date, every interaction. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small it seems." She did, her voice gaining a fragile strength as she meticulously laid out the facts, the timeline of harassment, the specific bylaws, cited the names of the board members. When she mentioned the HOA lawyer's statement, the blatant victim blaming, the clear ADA violations inherent in harassing a disabled child and her caregiver over reasonable access to and enjoyment of their own home and garden, she could almost feel his judicial mind at work, calmly, precisely cataloging the multitude of offenses, the potential charges. "This Judge Allister you mentioned," he said finally, his voice carefully, professionally neutral, after she'd recounted the police mentioning a name for Brenda's initial arraignment. "The one the DA's office thought would handle the initial proceedings for Brenda Jenkins." "Yes, I think that was the name. Judge Allister. Why, Dad, do you know him?" Sarah felt a flicker of something but couldn't name it. Another pause, longer this time, heavy with unspoken implications. Then, "Sarah, there's something you need to be aware of. It's a somewhat unusual development. Judge Allister was airlifted to Johns Hopkins late last night. A severe, unexpected cardiac event. His entire docket, including all new felony arraignments and any related emergency civil filings in this district, has been subject to emergency reassignment, as of approximately 3 hours ago. He took a slow, deliberate breath, a sound that crackled with significance down the phone line. The Jenkins assault case, any attendant federal civil rights complaints filed in relation to this matter, they will all be heard, at least in the preliminary stages, by me. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. Sarah felt a dizzying, powerful wave of emotions crash over her utter shock, then a fierce, almost savage surge of hope, and a strange, almost wild sense of impending righteous justice. Her father, Lily's grandfather, the man whose granddaughter Brenda Jenkins and the Harmony Creek HOA had so grievously, unforgivably wronged, was now, by an almost unbelievable twist of fate, the ultimate legal authority presiding over their immediate future. "Dad," she could barely speak, her throat tight. Are you sure? I will, of course, have to disclose our relationship to all parties involved immediately and formally," Michael said, his voice regaining some of its familiar, calm, professional tone, though she could still detect the iron core beneath. "The defense will undoubtedly and quite properly file a motion for my recusal. Given the direct familial connection under ordinary circumstances, I would grant it without hesitation to avoid even the faintest appearance of bias. However," he paused, "in cases of direct personal victimization of a judge or their immediate family, particularly when the alleged actions of the defendants appear to constitute an attack not just on individuals, but on the very fabric of community safety and the rule of law that I am sworn to uphold within this judicial district, the rules and precedents can be complex. We will see what the Judicial Ethics Committee advises regarding the full trial. But Sarah, regardless of who ultimately presides over a trial, I promise you, the full unmitigated weight of the law will be brought to bear. What they did to Lily, what they did to our family, that will not go unanswered. They will face justice." The news of Judge Michael Thompson's emergency assignment to the initial phases of the case, once formally announced to the relevant legal parties, sent immediate and significant shockwaves through the legal offices involved, and soon after through Harmony Creek itself. Brenda Jenkins's lawyer, a local attorney known more for bluster than brilliance, who had initially been so dismissive and arrogant, was reportedly in a state of frantic agitation, making panicked calls. Brenda Jenkins, upon learning the identity of the judge handling her arraignment and bail review, was said to have lost all of her smug confidence, becoming visibly distressed. The HOA board members, particularly Mr. Henderson and Ms. Albright, were rumored to be in a state of acute panic. Their carefully constructed self-serving narrative of a stressed employee dealing with a difficult, non-compliant resident was about to be meticulously scrutinized by a man who not only understood the letter of the law with unparalleled acuity, but also possessed a deeply personal, undeniable stake in its spirit. The motion for recusal was filed swiftly as expected. Judge Thompson, after formal consultation with the Judicial Ethics Committee, issued a detailed, carefully worded ruling. He acknowledged his profound personal relationship to the primary victim. He also noted the egregious and violent nature of the alleged crimes, the disturbing potential for systemic issues within the defendant HOA that may have fostered or enabled such behavior, and the overriding public interest in a swift, fair, and unambiguous adjudication, especially concerning the safety of vulnerable individuals. Citing specific precedents where judges had presided over initial proceedings or contempt hearings in cases involving direct threats or harm to their families, particularly when such acts could be construed as attempts to intimidate the judiciary or undermine public order, he denied the motion for recusal for the purposes of arraignment, bail hearings, preliminary evidentiary rulings, and initial discovery oversight. He stated unequivocally that he would reassess his recusal for the trial phase itself, ensuring that any full trial would be conducted before a different judge and an impartial jury, thereby preserving the integrity of any subsequent verdict. His ruling was a masterpiece of precise legal reasoning, unassailable in its logic and icy cold in its delivery. The message was unmistakably clear. There would be no hiding, no special treatment, no legal loopholes. The process would be rigorous. The next regularly scheduled HOA community meeting had been on the calendar for weeks, set to occur before Judge Thompson's unexpected involvement became widely known beyond the immediate legal parties and Sarah. Sarah, armed with this new, almost unbelievable knowledge, a secret weapon of immense power, decided she had to attend. Lily, still recovering her leg in a cast, but her spirit slowly, tentatively rekindling, insisted on going too. Her small jaw was set with a surprising, quiet determination that mirrored her grandfather's. "I want them to see me, Mommy." She'd set her voice barely above a whisper but firm. "I want them to look at me and see what they did." The community center hall, usually sparsely attended for routine HOA business, was packed to capacity, the air thick with palpable tension, unspoken accusations, and a buzz of nervous anticipation. Mr. Henderson stood at the podium, flanked by a visibly trembling Ms. Albright and a stone-faced, pale Brenda Jenkins, who, incredibly out on bail, this was before her bail would be revoked, had the audacity to attend, perhaps in a misguided attempt to project normalcy or defiance. Henderson cleared his throat, attempting his usual booming, jovial tone, but it fell disconcertingly flat, swallowed by the heavy atmosphere. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his smile forced and unconvincing. "We're all, of course, deeply aware of the unfortunate incident that has recently cast something of a shadow over our wonderful tight-knit community. We want to assure each and every one of you the board is taking this matter very, very seriously." "Seriously?" A voice sharp and angry called out from the back of the room. "You bailed her out. Is that what you call serious?" Murmurs of angry agreement rippled through the crowd. Henderson flushed a deep, blotchy red. Now let's maintain decorum. Brenda Jenkins has been a dedicated, if perhaps overzealous, volunteer for this community for many years. And in this country, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. She maintains, and will continue to maintain, that she acted in perceived self-defense after sustained provocation and feeling genuinely threatened. Brenda nodded sharply, a flicker of her old arrogance, momentarily returning to her eyes, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. Sarah, sitting in the front row with Lily beside her in her wheelchair, her father's carefully chosen words echoing with potent reassurance in her mind, felt a calm, almost detached resolve settle over her. She slowly raised her hand. Henderson pointedly ignored her. "Now, regarding the upcoming summer festival and the new budget for pool maintenance, Mr. Henderson..." Sarah's voice cut through the room, not loud but clear, steady and carrying an undeniable weight that made Henderson visibly flinch. "With all due respect, we are not here tonight to discuss the summer festival or the pool. We are here to discuss the undeniable fact that your dedicated volunteer shot my 10-year-old disabled daughter in her own front yard." A sudden, profound hush fell over the hall. All eyes, hundreds of them, turned to Sarah and Lily. Lily, her small leg encased in a brightly colored cast, adorned with her friends' signatures, looked directly at Brenda Jenkins, her gaze unwavering, unsettlingly direct for a child. Brenda scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. She was consistently non-compliant. Her mother was verbally aggressive, hostile. I genuinely feared for my safety. She rushed towards me. "Feared for your safety?" Sarah repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerously low, controlled pitch that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "From a child in a wheelchair admiring her own flowers, from a mother asking you repeatedly to lower your voice and leave our property." She stood up slowly, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze locked on Brenda's, then sweeping to include Henderson and Albright. "You, Brenda Jenkins, terrorized my daughter for weeks over a small painted sign that advocated kindness. You threatened us. You stalked us. You brought a loaded weapon to a verbal disagreement with a child present. And this board," her gaze like a laser pinned Henderson and Albright, "you enabled her every step of the way. You endorsed her hateful rhetoric. You dismissed every concern, every plea for civility, every warning sign that this woman was unstable and becoming dangerous. Now see here, Mrs. Manning." Henderson blustered his face, puffing up his voice, regaining some of its usual pomposity, though his eyes darted nervously. "There's absolutely no need for such inflammatory accusations and baseless character assassination." "Inflammatory?" Sarah's voice rose, tinged with incredulity and raw pain. "My daughter has a titanium pin holding her femur together. She wakes up screaming from nightmares every single night. That is not an accusation." "Mr. Henderson, that is a fact. A hard, painful, undeniable fact. A fact that you and this board seem pathologically determined to ignore, minimize, and excuse. This entire unfortunate matter is being handled by the appropriate authorities. Ms. Albright interjected, her voice thin and reedy, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. We should all respect that and let the legal process play out as it should. Oh, I quite agree, Miss Albright, Sarah said, and a small, almost imperceptible knowing smile touched her lips, a smile that did not reach her eyes. The legal process, which I believe for the initial arraignment bail considerations and preliminary federal oversight regarding aggravated assault and potential ADA civil rights violations, is now under the very capable, very meticulous jurisdiction of a certain Judge Michael Thompson. Does that name by any chance ring a bell for any of you on the board or for your legal counsel? A subtle, almost electric shift occurred in the room. A few people who followed local and federal legal news closely gasped audibly. Henderson and Albright exchanged swift, panicked glances. Brenda Jenkins' face, already pale, went a shade whiter, then visibly slackened. Judge Thompson. Henderson stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. The federal judge, Judge Michael Thompson. The very same. Sarah confirmed, her voice now ringing with a newfound, undeniable power that seemed to fill the suddenly silent hall. As it happens, Judge Michael Thompson is also known by another name. To Lily, he's simply Grandpa. The collective intake of breath was audible, a sudden whoosh of surprise and dawning comprehension. Brenda Jenkins looked as though she'd been physically struck, her eyes wide and vacant. The color drained completely from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. Mr. Henderson gripped the podium for support, his knuckles white as bone. Ms. Albright sank slowly, almost collapsing into her chair, her mouth hanging open. He's her grandfather. Someone whispered loudly from the astonished crowd, the words rippling outwards like a shockwave. Indeed, Sarah said, her gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. And he is, as you can imagine, very, very interested in how the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association conducts its business and treats its residents, especially disabled children and their families. He is profoundly interested in an organization that arms its volunteers and then rushes to defend them when they shoot little girls in broad daylight. She paused, letting the full weight of her words sink into the terrified silence. He's also, I understand from his clerk, quite an expert on civil rights violations, official misconduct, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and the potential misappropriation of HOA funds for the criminal defense of individuals acting under color of HOA authority. I believe his chambers have already begun the process of issuing subpoenas for your complete financial records, all meeting minutes from the past 5 years, and any and all correspondence related to compliance issues and Ms. Jenkins's committee. The silence in the room was now absolute, charged with a tension that was almost palpable, thick with fear, and the dawning realization of catastrophic consequences. The last vestiges of smugness had vanished from Brenda Jenkins. The bluster was entirely gone from Henderson. Only raw, unadulterated fear remained stark and undeniable on their faces. A neighbor, Mrs. Davison, an elderly, kind-faced woman who had always been sweet to Lily, bringing her cookies and admiring her garden, slowly, tremulously rose to her feet. I think, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but clear and resonant in the stillness, that Mr. Henderson and Ms. Albright, and frankly, the entire current board, owe the Manning family, and indeed this entire community, a profound and immediate apology. And then I think they all need to resign. Immediately, tonight. Another voice joined hers, stronger this time. Resign. Then another and another. Shame on you all. Justice for Lily. The calls grew louder, more insistent, a wave of righteous anger and pent-up frustration finally unleashed, washing over the disgraced board members. Brenda Jenkins, for the very first time since Sarah had known her, looked utterly, completely broken. She stared at Lily, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, then at Sarah, then around at the furious, accusing faces of her neighbors, the people whose property values she had claimed to protect. There was no escape, no defense, no ally left in the room. Mr. Henderson opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words coming out his face, a mask of defeated resignation. Miss Albright was openly, silently weeping, her shoulders shaking. The aftermath was as swift as it was decisive. Brenda Jenkins' bail was revoked by Judge Thompson at an emergency hearing the very next morning, following the presentation of compelling new evidence by the DA's office, security footage from a neighbor's previously unmentioned camera that Sarah hadn't known existed, capturing not only the shooting, but also several of Brenda's earlier increasingly aggressive confrontations and her clear attempts to intimidate other potential witnesses in the days following the incident. The HOA board, facing overwhelming, unrelenting pressure from the enraged community, multiple lawsuits, and the looming, undeniable threat of a comprehensive federal investigation into their governance, finances, and potential criminal negligence, resigned en masse within the week. An interim committee led by a reluctant but determined Mrs. Davison and other genuinely concerned residents was swiftly formed with a clear mandate to completely overhaul the HOA's convoluted bylaws, promote absolute transparency in all dealings, and foster a genuine, inclusive sense of community, not a rigidly enforced, soulless conformity. The legal proceedings against Brenda Jenkins moved forward with uncharacteristic speed. Judge Thompson, having made several critical initial rulings on discovery parameters and evidence admissibility with meticulous, unimpeachable impartiality, then, as he had promised and as ethical conduct demanded, formally recused himself from presiding over the actual criminal trial. He transferred the case to a respected colleague known for her fairness, her stern demeanor, and her intolerance for violence. But his initial firm oversight had ensured the case was built on an irrefutable foundation of solid fact and properly acquired evidence. The evidence, including the damning security footage and testimony from several neighbors who finally felt safe enough to come forward, was overwhelming. Brenda Jenkins was found guilty by a jury of her peers on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and several federal hate crime charges related to willfully intimidating and causing injury to a disabled individual. She received a lengthy prison sentence. The trial judge's sentencing remarks noted the profound and cynical betrayal of community trust and the unimaginable terror inflicted upon a vulnerable child in what should have been her safest space. The civil suit that Sarah now represented pro bono by a team from a top-tier national civil rights firm her father had discreetly connected her with, filed against the former HOA board members individually and against Brenda Jenkins, resulted in a significant monetary settlement. Most of it was placed into a carefully managed trust for Lily's ongoing and future medical care, therapy, and education. More importantly for Sarah, the settlement included a public, formally notarized written apology from each of the former board members, acknowledging their gross negligence, their abdication of responsibility, and the profound harm caused to Lily and Sarah. Harmony Creek began slowly, tentatively to heal. The Be Kind sign, lovingly repaired by a neighborhood craftsman and weatherproofed against the elements, was reinstalled in Lily's garden. It was no longer a point of ugly contention, but a cherished symbol of resilience, courage, and the enduring power of a simple positive message. The community, humbled, chastened, and irrevocably awakened, rallied around the Mannings with genuine warmth and support. A community-wide fundraiser spearheaded by Mrs. Davison was held to help design and build a beautiful, fully accessible playground in the local park, which was unanimously named Lily's Place. Neighbors who had once been silent, cowed by the HOA's petty tyrannies, found their voices forging new, authentic connections, determined that such a horrifying abuse of power, such a catastrophic failure of simple human decency, would never ever happen again in their community. Lily, with the incredible, miraculous resilience of youth, slowly but surely recovered. The physical scars on her leg would remain a permanent, visible reminder of the ordeal, but her bright, effervescent spirit, though undeniably dimmed and shadowed for a time, began to shine through once more. She found joy again in her art, in her friends, in the lovingly rebuilt garden, where the sunflowers now grew taller and more vibrant than ever before. She even started talking with a new seriousness in her voice about possibly becoming a lawyer someday, like Grandpa, she'd say, to help people who can't fight for themselves, especially kids. Sarah watched her daughter, a profound, quiet sense of peace, finally settling over her weary heart. The fight had been arduous, the emotional toll immense, almost unbearable at times, but they had faced down the darkness, the ugliness, and found an unexpected, hard-won light on the other side. Justice in its multifaceted forms had been served. not just through the cold mechanics of the courts, but more meaningfully in the fundamental transformation of their community in the reassertion of kindness over cruelty. The echoes of that single terrible gunshot would likely never entirely fade from their memories, but they were now interwoven with stronger, more resonant, more hopeful sounds. The joyous laughter of children, including Lily from the new playground. The comfortable murmur of friendly, easy conversation between neighbors who now truly saw each other. And the quiet, unwavering strength of a little girl who, through her suffering and her simple sign, had inadvertently taught an entire community the true, enduring meaning of kindness. And sometimes, late in the evening when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep, Sarah would call her father, not to talk about laws or lawsuits or appeals, but just to hear his calm, steady voice, the voice of the remarkable man who, in his own quiet, powerful way, had helped restore not just order, but a measure of genuine harmony to their world, proving yet again that even in the face of petty cruelty and shocking senseless violence, love, courage, and justice could and ultimately would prevail.